Next up is Dr. Jeremy Williams, president at Arbor Vitae Environmental Services Limited. And for the past several years, Jeremy's been a core team member for the Sustainable Biomass Program's regional risk assessments in Canada. He helped to develop 3 forest carbon protocols, develop project description documents for afforestation projects, and has undertaken reviews and analyses of different forest carbon protocols, risks of reversal assessments in 3 provinces. Jeremy led the preparation of a catchment area analysis for 2 pellet mills in northern BC, where they looked at the effects of the pellet industry on regional forests. And he was part of a team that reviewed forest practices in Nova Scotia with William Leahy, otherwise known as the Leahy Report. Jeremy holds a PhD in forest economics from University of Toronto. Jeremy?
Thanks very much, Gord. I appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'd like to share with you some of the discussions that we've been having and the information that we've generated as a result of working on the regional risk assessments for Nova Scotia and New Brunswick that Gord alluded to. There's been a team of consultants led by Brenda Hopkin who have been working on a number of regional risk assessments for the Sustainable Biomass Program across Canada. And the regional risk assessment for British Columbia was just finalized. The one for Quebec has been completed. And we're kind of in the middle innings of the New Brunswick one and in somewhat earlier stage with Nova Scotia. So I'd like to just review some of the shifts that have taken place in the New Brunswick and Nova Scotia forest sectors over the past 20 years, review the emergence of pellet facilities, and talk about where they obtain their fiber, and then discuss how the procurement of fiber for pellet facilities and for other biomass uses can be very ecologically compatible, and is especially compatible with the directions for forest management that were proposed by William Leahy and his group. So in both New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, the forest sector, the forest area is really divided into 3 different ownerships. There's a portion that's owned by the provincial government, which is referred to as the Crown Forest. There's an industrial freehold land, which is private land owned by large forest products companies that own mills. And then there are private woodlots. And all of these components are very important parts of the overall wood supply. And the forests in the Maritimes, like commercial forests anywhere, have a mix of different species and also a wide range of quality of log types. And so there's a wide range in terms of the value of products that are produced from the various forests. Ideally, what you would like to do is have a forest industry that is able to use a wide variety of species and also the full range of products that are produced out of the forest. So in that way, whenever you're harvesting trees, you're able to use the entire tree. And so what typically happens is that the sawmills use the higher quality logs, and the lower quality logs, which have defects like imperfect shape or rot or cracked, have typically been used for pulp and paper. And the pulp and paper sector has also been a big user of wood chips that are a byproduct from sawmills. However, in the last 20 years, the pulp and paper sectors in both Nova Scotia and New Brunswick have been reduced in size. And in New Brunswick, between 2004 and 2007, 3 mills were closed. 3 large pulp and paper mills were closed in the Miramichi, Bathurst, and Dalhousie. And as of 2021, there are just 6 pulp and paper plants remaining in the province. And these are owned by J.D. Irving, Aditya Birla, and Twin Rivers Paper. And during this period too, the ownership of many of the mills, with the exception of those owned by Irving, has changed as well. So there's been a lot of tumult in the sector. In Nova Scotia, the closures didn't start until later, but of the 3 mills that existed in 2010, the Bowater Mersey mill closed in 2013. Northern Pulp has just closed in 2020, and it's not clear whether that one will reopen or not. If they put in an appropriate environmental treatment system, they may reopen again. But for the time being, there's just one mill remaining in the province, that's Port Hawkesbury Paper. And so this has created a huge loss of demand for sawmill chips and for low quality logs in both of these provinces. And you can see that this is shown up in some of the statistics. Between 2007 and 10, over 30% of the wood that was used in New Brunswick was in the form of pulpwood and chips. But by 2016 and 2017, only 15% of the total amount of wood used industrial was of those two fiber types. So there's a question that has arisen, is what do you do with all the low quality wood and the surplus wood chips that are available from sawmills? You really need a market for these, and it's difficult for landowners, sawmills, and harvesters, because without a market for low quality wood, the landowner really can only sell the saw timber or the higher value wood on the property. The harvesters are only harvesting part of the forest and they're leaving behind the low quality wood, and that increases the cost per cubic meter and also just makes for a difficult relationship with the landowners when you tell them you either can't even purchase their wood for a reasonable price because so much of it is low quality, or you have to only take the best out and leave the worst. And sawmills are also in a very difficult situation because they depend heavily on the revenues from selling the chips, and also without the markets for chips, have to deal with disposal of them. And while some of them certainly do use the chips for hog fuel and for other heat and energy generation, not all of them do. And this has cropped up as a significant problem, and it was one of the reasons for the Leahy Commission being started off in 2018, because the Nova Scotia Premier had been getting a lot of complaints, especially from the western part of the province, from private woodlot owners who weren't able to sell any of their wood at all. That region of Nova Scotia is where the Bowater Mersey mill was, and there was also a sawmill associated with that closed down. And the other source of complaints to the Premier was that there was way too much clear cutting in the province, and Nova Scotia had made efforts to try to reduce that on Crown land, but hadn't been very successful. And again, part of the reason is lack of market for low grade. So it's not only an economic issue, but it has become a political issue in Nova Scotia. So there, fortunately, is a biomass sector in the two provinces. And in New Brunswick, my understanding is that the first pellet mill was established in 2008, and there are now 5 of them. And recently, New Brunswick accounted for 7.3% of Canada's pellet production capacity, or approximately 338,000 tons per year. And this was equivalent to 6.1% of export sales with a value of $24 million Canadian. And 85% of the production was exported to the UK. And in 2019, 2020, 73% of the fiber that was used by the largest pellet mills came from mill residuals, and the rest was from low-grade logs and from bush chips, in-bush chipping of the slash, or many of the logs that were used were residuals that were left over, or logs that were taken out from thinning that otherwise weren't commercially viable. So when you do the math around the volumes of logs and chips consumed by the 3 largest pellet mills in the province, they use the equivalent of 1.6% of the provincial harvest, which is a very low amount. And when you take into account the residual fiber that's used by those mills as well from the sawmills, they use the equivalent of 6.4% of the provincial harvest. But it's important to say here that they're not actually adding to the provincial harvest specifically, because certainly the residual from the sawmills was wood that was already cut and would have been cut anyways, regardless of whether there were biomass facilities or not. And a lot of the bush chips are just the low grade that's taken out from harvests that have already removed the more valuable saw timber and the veneer logs. So basically, what's happened is that the availability of a market for low grade has supported sawmills by enabling saw timber to go to the sawmills. It's also supported employment in the lumber sector, and also supported employment in the contractors, and also the incomes of private woodlots owners. In New Brunswick, or in Nova Scotia, the first pellet mill was established even earlier in 1995, and there are, I believe, 2 in the province. And Nova Scotia accounted for 4.3% of Canada's pellet production, about 200,000 tons per year, and only a small amount of it was exported, most of it to the UK, with a value of 2 million. And in addition to these pellet mills, Nova Scotia Power uses a lot of biomass. There are 2 biomass-based electricity plants, and there's also an extensive chip export operation out of Sheet Harbor. So the amount of wood going into biomass in Nova Scotia is much more than is just accounted for by the pellet mills. In Nova Scotia, almost all of the fiber used for pellets comes from sawmill residuals. And again, it's the same story. The abundance of with the abundance of low grade in the province, there's no, I mean, there's the way the market is set up with contractors doing the majority of the harvesting and looking to maximize the revenue that they earn from cutting woodlots and just forest in general. They're going to sell the best quality wood where it will get the highest price, and that means the saw timber, studwood, veneer mills and veneer logs goes to the sawmills and veneer, and the low grade will go to anybody that will take it. And so if they're near a pulp mill, some of it might go to that, and the rest will go to biomass facilities. So in 2019, 2020, only 71% of the estimated allowable cut for private woodlots in New Brunswick was harvested, and only 32% of the allowable cut for hardwood was harvested. Now, these allowable cuts are just kind of putative allowable cuts that are taken by estimating the growth and then the annual harvest that can be taken without diminishing the growing stock, because there is no cut control on the private woodlots. But what this indicates is that the potential, there's a lot of potential wood available for use, and some of that can certainly be used for biomass. Almost 500, about 500,000 cubic meters of softwood and 1.25 million cubic meters of roundwood. And we don't have figures for Nova Scotia, but they're likely very similar as well, because the private land harvest has fallen off in that province as well. So as I mentioned, the Leahy report, looking at the state of forest management and making recommendations as to how forest management might be altered in Nova Scotia, recommended that forest management, including harvesting, should be more compatible with the ecological processes of the Acadian forest, which is the primary forest in throughout the Maritimes. And the recommendation, which was directed only to Crown land, was that the harvesting should be more compatible, which means more partial harvesting, because the Acadian forest has a very high diversity of species. Many of them are long-lived species, and many of them do well growing under shade or under a level of competition. And so the valuable species such as red spruce, sugar maple, yellow birch, eastern white pine, and so on, are ones that do well in a partial harvesting scenario. And so that was the recommendation. And as I say, it was only directed to Crown land, but it is also to be encouraged on private land. The review also recommended a shift to a triad approach, which is where the land is zoned. And again, this is only on the Crown land, but part of the land would be managed very intensively. Part of it would be managed very extensively. So low levels of harvesting and long rotations. And then part of it would be protected. And so this is also something that the Nova Scotia government is planning to put into action, and they're working on how to do that right now. With this shift on Crown land to more ecological harvesting, as I mentioned, there'll be more shelter wood, more selection harvesting, more thinning, and these produce a lot more low quality wood, especially in the earlier stages of implementing a partial harvesting regime, when a key objective is to upgrade the quality of the stand. And so to do that, you take out a lot of the low grade material that's there, the species that are unsuitable, and so on. And so this facilitates the supply of low-grade wood, which can be used by biomass facilities. And so biomass can certainly support improved forest management in Nova Scotia. And what's also beneficial in Nova Scotia is that their approach to funding private silviculture on private land, they provide a lot of basically financial incentives to do that. So they have the system in place already to support a shift to increased partial harvesting and thinning on private land. And again, biomass can really help round out the sector and support this approach. So the key conclusions are that the shift that's taken place in these two provinces towards a more solid wood-based forest sector creates a dilemma regarding how to use pulpwood and other low-grade fiber. And biomass is a way of diversifying the forest sector and supporting the entire forest sector by creating a market for this fiber. And especially with the loss of the pulp and paper mills in these two provinces, there's a lot of opportunity for increased use of biomass. Biomass also can be a very helpful way of supporting the planned shift to more ecologically based forestry in Nova Scotia. And there's a lot of opportunity in both provinces with the unused available allowable cut for sustainable biomass use to be expanded. Thanks very much. Be happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy, for that presentation. It was very insightful. So we're going to get into a few questions here, just one or two, because we're a bit over time. First off, what are some of the barriers to getting more pellet plants operating in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, given that there is this market for low-grade wood, or there's so much low-grade wood available, but we don't see as many pellet plants as maybe we should?
It's a very good question, Ellen, and I think the other speakers have touched on some of the limiting factors, but I believe it's a combination of changes to policy that would be more promotional of it and provide more incentives for moving to more biomass, and also providing, publicizing the pilot projects that are out there, and providing more information. And I think those are the key things, because a lot of the technology is there, as we have seen.
Okay, and then following up for that, how can we kind of get more public support for pellet plant operations in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick?
It's a good question, because there's a couple of elements to this. One is just more support for the use of biomass in general, but also overcoming the objections of the environmental community to the use of biomass and the misconceptions that are perpetrated with respect to where the fiber comes from. And so, more information, I think more sort of rigorous assessment of the claims that environmentalists have in terms of where fiber is coming from. And we know that the sector has very good tracking mechanisms in place, because with the certification systems that they're part of, they're required to be able to demonstrate the sourcing of their biomass. And so I think we have the information available to publicize, this is where it comes from, this is what it looks like, And I think we can, by presenting this in a way that I think is easily accessible, would be helpful.
Mhm. Absolutely. So last question here. Where do you see the markets for increased pellet production? You expect it to be exported or a local market?
I think both, really. I don't think there's, I think there are a lot of opportunities for use of biomass within the provinces, as I think Jamie pointed this out very clearly. But there's also a lot of opportunity to export as well, because they have great market position, and the UK and the EU are excellent markets. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
Awesome. Okay. So I think we're out of time now for questions, but thanks, Jeremy. And thanks,
Thanks
everyone.
very much, Eldon.